Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of February of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And you know that it is so interesting to see how the Western countries, the Western media changes its opinion about Zelensky. 3 years ago he was the savior, he was the man who was protecting the European countries, the Western countries, NATO, the United States of America, Poland. He was protecting the world from evil, from danger, from Russia, from aggression, from everything bad, and he was protecting everything that was good. 3 years passed since the beginning of the special military operation, and now we see completely different picture. For example, today The Hill published a very interesting article, The Mad King of Kiev, Why Zelensky Can't Afford to End the War. The Mad King of Kiev, the Mad King of Kiev. And they were talking obviously not about Putin or Donald Trump, they were talking about Zelensky. Zelensky is desperate to continue the conflict in Ukraine, to stay in power. If the conflict ends, so does his presidency. If there were elections, he would lose. Ukraine cannot win it in any meaningful sense, writes the American publication The Hill. The publication emphasized that Zelensky chose the path of those blinded by power, and therefore Ukraine will suffer until the very end. This is something like a pathological form of egoism when self-preservation is achieved at any cost, the author of publication stated. This is the situation and this is the reality we're living in. Just 3 years passed since the beginning of the special military operation, and from the savior you can become the Mad King of Kiev. You know that the security conference in Kiev ended, and there were lots of talks, lots of statements made by different politicals. The US was taking their own line. The European countries were talking about their things, about their problems. Ukraine was talking about their problems. And probably you will remember this Munich security conference, because that was very important event. You will remember this. Somebody will not remember. Somebody, I believe, didn't know that something like this happened, of course. But obviously you will remember something. You will remember something from this event, from this situation. And if you ask my opinion, how will I remember the conference, the Munich Security Conference? Probably this picture will stay in my mind for ages. In this picture we can see how Zelensky was discussing the question of Ukraine, was discussing the question of the conflict. He was talking about impossible negotiations between US and Russia without Ukraine. And probably the funniest thing he said that Ukraine doesn't need elections. Nobody needs elections. There's just two people who needs elections, Russian President Putin and several voices from US, including the President Trump. Nobody else needs elections in Ukraine. The funniest thing ever. But this is not the most important phrase made by Zelensky. This picture to me is probably the scene I will remember forever. Just take a look at this picture. Zelensky in the corner. Zelensky in the corner, completely surrounded by press, by journalists, by media. Of course, we don't see weapons, we don't see guns, we don't see anything like this. We can see microphones and cameras, but it doesn't change the picture. Zelensky completely in the corner, without security, without his army, without anything. He was talking and he was talking and he was talking, and he is in the corner. We have a lot of different talk statements, let's say that we are used in our daily lives by saying lion in the corner, a mouse in the corner, animal in the corner, anybody in the corner, and now we see the same picture. Zelensky in the corner. It's very interesting to understand who is he in the corner, whether he's a lion in the corner or he's not a lion in the corner. But anyway, despite the fact what kind of him in the corner, obviously we understand that when anybody appears in the corner surrounded by enemies, surrounded by them who want to see you fall, you can do a lot of things, and sometimes you can do a lot of very bad things. This picture tells me that most likely Zelensky will do something very bad in the very near future. I'm not saying that this is the truth, I'm just speculating, maybe projecting, but obviously he's in the corner and he is ready and able to do anything he wants. So now let's return back to Ukraine and let's discuss the situation, because during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of very interesting and important updates. And you know that we got so many updates and so huge advance of the Russians on the ground, and I believe that the last time we saw something like this took place probably several months ago, when the weather was good, somewhere in October, maybe September, when the Russians were advancing in the vicinity of Pokrovsk, when the Russians were fighting for the settlement of Vremivka, Novosilovka, and even earlier. And after that we haven't received anything until now. So there were just updates that the Russians were attacking, lots of political events, and one can say that maybe the Russians decided to stop, or the Russians were exhausted because we didn't have anything that can confirm additional Russian progress. But when talking about events that took place on the 15th and on the 16th of February, we can say that the Russians shown us that they are still able, they are still ready, and they still have strength to continue their offensive operation, because the results that the Russians shown us today and yesterday, probably the last time we saw several months ago. Now let's discuss the details, and let's start from the most important area, from the Vremivka Novosilovka direction. As you can see, we have a lot of icons, first of all, and as you can see, we have changes on the ground. And first, let's discuss the changes. This is the map that you can see in front of your screens, is the map by the end of the 15th of February, so yesterday's. And let's check the situation by the end of the 16th. We see several changes on the ground. First of all, the Russians managed to improve their positions, answer the village of Novosiolka. We will discuss this in a minute. Another important advance is that the Russians managed to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Mokry Yali, this one, and took under control several tree lines and several strongholds in this area. Another important progress is that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to cross the river of Mokry Yali and answer the settlement of Nove from the southeast. Obviously, the significant progress of the armored force of Russian Federation after the battle for Vremivka Novosiolka, and we see that Ukrainians, as for now, can't do anything with this. Now let's discuss in details. As for the north and changes to the north of Vremivka Novosilovka, both of them in the area of Nove and in this part were made and were published by different sources. The Ukrainians, Deep State, publish this progress, this update for us. They are saying that this is exactly what the Russians managed to achieve during the previous 24 hours without showing us any videos, any geolocations, any pictures that can confirm this. I believe that in a day or two we will confirm them, but as for now we are going to keep these territories as a contested area. The most important update is coming from the settlement of Novosiolka. As you can see, we have also adjusted the map in this part, but as you can see, we have colored these territories in Russian favor, which means that we had not just something like a different mappers update, we have real picture, or at least real video that can confirm this. Let's discuss this in details. Today, the pro-Ukrainian source Deep State published an article where we were talking and describing another Russian offensive operation in this area. They published their own map. As you can see, they have colored the territory of Novosilovka as contested area or as a gray zone, and they published just two photos. This is the first photo, this is the second one, and in this photo we can see the quality is not so good, so I will describe you. In these photos we can see Russian convoys that were entering the settlement of Novosilka, and there are 2 points, 2 geolocations that show us where exactly Russian vehicles were spotted. So one of the vehicles, Russian convoy, was spotted exactly on the territory of this injunction of roads, which means that the Russians most likely managed to go through this company's stronghold and they managed to capture this territory. Based on this photo, based on this article, we have adjusted the map. Now let's discuss in details. A mechanized column of 4 units of equipment with landing troops made unfortunately a successful attempt to storm the village of Novosiolka. Once again, the Russians Russian tactics are noticeable. When a tank is ahead of the column, most likely hung with electronic warfare equipment, and the crew of the equipment was confident in its invulnerability. Unfortunately, the column passed one of the brigades, entered the village and landed. The landing troops actually in the rear of the adjacent unit. So they are saying that they managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to land infantry on the territory of the village. The Ukrainians are saying that currently, by the time this article was made, by the time this video was published or transferred to deep state, there were at least 20 soldiers that entered the village. Most likely the Russians will try now to dig in deeper, and they will try to repel possible upcoming attack from the Ukrainian side that most likely is going to take place during the night between the 16th and the 17th of February. If the Russians are able to repel this upcoming attack, then this is going to be the beginning of a very big disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine. And from this picture we can see that currently the Russians are trying to outflank this company stronghold to the northwest of Velika Novosilovka. The Russians will continue offensive further in the direction of Vilne Pole from the settlement of Novosolka, and the Russians will try to take by after the fall of the settlement of Nove Cheretovata. The Russians will attack in the west towards the settlement of Burlatske. And then Ukrainians will have just two options, either to stay there or to retreat, but most likely they will prefer the second one, because if they choose the first one, most likely they will stay there forever. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation inside of the Ulakli Constantinople pocket. As you can see, we have a lot of changes on the ground. We have a lot of icons, we have a lot of articles, and we have a lot of changes. First of all, and probably the most important update was published today by pro-Ukrainian source. Most likely this upcoming night, usually when talking about the pro-Ukrainian sources, they adjust and change the map somewhere at 2-3 a.m. Of Ukrainian time. So that's why in several hours we're going to have additional changes. And the previous update was that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt. The Russians managed to answer the southeastern part of Constantinople, but Ukrainians are saying that they managed to bring additional forces, reserves, and to stop the Russian advance, to defeat the Russians and to force them to fall back. The Ukrainians are not saying where exactly the Russians were stopped and where exactly the Russians were forced to fall back, but obviously that wasn't the main purpose of the Russians. The main purpose was just to slow down the Ukrainians and not to allow the Ukrainians to bring reinforcements in the area of Ulakli, where the main battles were taking place. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have a lot of changes. We have noticeable changes of the mappers. We have different Western media changes. We have pro-Russian resources changes on the map. We have once again pro-Ukrainian sources changes, and all of them are saying just about one thing: that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the pocket, managed to enter the eastern part of Ulakli. Most likely, some sources are saying that the Russians managed to secure the territory completely, to take this pocket under complete control, but I'm not sure about this. You know that I'm not saying that there were thousands of Ukrainians. Obviously, there was just several hundreds of Ukrainians, and most likely most of them were caught in cordon without any possibilities for evacuation. Maybe this upcoming night, the Ukrainians will try to break through the encirclement with the purpose to enter Ulakli, but I believe that during this retreat process, they will be forced to move in the direction of the Russian positions, and most of them will not be able to break through the encirclement. As for now, it's impossible, as I understand. So we believe that in this pocket there are still several small pockets of Ukrainian resistance that the Russians will try to clear during this upcoming night. Then they will shorten the lines, and then the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the western direction with the purpose to secure the western part of Ulakli. Also, we expect that this upcoming night the Russians will make another attack in the direction of Constantinople, because the Russians see that the defense of Ukraine is not so good, so they will try to fold this direction completely. Now let's discuss Ulakli. As for this area, we have changes. Most of them were made based on the Ukrainian sources, but we also have several geolocations that were published by the Ukrainian side from the 37th Marine Brigade, that is the core brigade of this direction. And according to them, we can see the moment when the Russians were moving through the fields towards the Ukrainian positions. We see how the Ukrainians were trying to resist the Russians by sending more and more drones, by bombing the Russians, by establishing establishing minefields and many other different things were used by the Ukrainians to stabilize the situation. And for example, this is the moment that was geolocated on map. In this video we can see how the Russians landed exactly in this point and how the Ukrainians began bombing them with FPV drones. Based on this video we have adjusted just the fields behind these positions. As for now, telling the truth, right before I start making this video, right before I press the record button, one of my assistant sent me a video that shows the Russian presence, geolocated Russian presence in the eastern part of Ulakli. So we just haven't managed to adjust the map right before the video, so we will discuss this video probably during the next let's say analysis. So anyway, we got the video that confirms Russian control over the pocket, so it's just something like a spoiler for you. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the Dnipro direction, because from this area, as you can see, we also got some changes. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral sources confirmed additional progress on the ground made by the Russian forces. We see that the Russians are moving through 3 lines, mainly using infantry, and now the Russians are about to outflank the settlement of Preobrazhenka, and now the Russians are about to begin offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Troitskaya. When talking about Troinska, they says there are 2 settlements left for the Russians to reach the border, Gorkovo and Troitska. These are very small villages, and I'm not sure that the Ukrainians are able to show any resistance in this area. We believe that maybe by the end of February the Russians will take the border under complete control, and this is going to be a very significant media victory in Russian favor. Anyway, I would like to remind you that according to Ukrainian sources, the Russians redeployed the divisions, 2 divisions of their 5th army. Correct me if I'm wrong, let's take a look at this article. Yes, the units of the 46th brigade reported that the purpose of the offensive was to cover the disruption of the transfer of 2 divisions of the 8th army, 20th and 150th separate motor rifles divisions to the Torietsk direction, which had previously operated on the northern face of the Nove direction. So the Ukrainians are saying that this Russian offensive main purpose is not just to break through and to go in the direction of Kiev. The main purpose was to hide and to protect the redeployment of forces of the armored force of Russian Federation from this area, from Dnipro direction, in the direction of Toretsk. So where the Russians are about to begin probably the general battle. Once again, let's continue with this. The Russians are advancing. Most likely the Russians realize that Ukrainians don't have enough of forces to stop the Russians. The Russians realize that they also don't need so many troopers in this area, and they decided to redeploy 2 brigades, 2 divisions in the direction of Toretsk. And despite the redeployment, the Russians continue offensive. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, and today we got lots of very interesting updates from here as well. Today, most of the mappers, neutral mappers, pro-Ukrainian mappers, Russian mappers reported that as a result of offensive operation, more precisely that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the armored forces of Russian Federation managed to restore complete control over the settlement by the name of Pishana. So based on this report, we have colored this territory as a contested area because we had this territory yesterday under complete Ukraine control. Now we have some doubts about this due to this report, and if this information is correct, then the Russians managed the most important to restore the main supply line that goes between the settlement of Shevchenka, the settlement of Vovka, and further in the northern directions to the settlement of Kotlina and to the settlement of Udachna. So this line is now once again under complete Russian control, and if the Russians are able to secure Pishana and to move further in the direction of Zverovo by pushing the Ukrainians back from this area, then the Russians will most likely restore their offensive in the area of Kotlina, because the Ukrainians, due to some problems from the Russian side with supply support, with logistic, were able to restore control over the mine, over the industrial zone. So this is the changes. For example, this is the territory by the end of 15th. The Russians were controlling these territories, and now, according to different mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over them because of problems with logistic. Now the Russians secured logistic, fixed the issue, and most likely will resume their attempts to attack further deep inside of Sergeyevka or the city of Pokrovsk. Anyway, today we got another report that the Russians managed to improve their positions in the city of Udachna as well by shortening the distance to the border. Currently, the distance between the edge Russian positions and the border itself is already around 5 kilometers, which, telling the truth, is nothing. There are just 1.5 settlements in front of Russians. Obviously, it will take time to secure them, but we understand the direction of where exactly the Russians are moving. Now let's discuss the situation in Constantinople. As I told you a minute ago, the Russians reinforced this direction with 2 divisions. I'm not sure that the Russians are going to attack in a day or in 2. Obviously, it will take time, but obviously in 2-3 weeks, the Russians will begin another full-scale offensive operation in the direction of Constantinople. And something tells me that this attack is going to take place, this general battle is going to take place during the negotiation process between Russia, USA and Ukraine, and this battle will determine and will probably the starting point of the draft of peace agreement. Who wins the general battle will probably dictate the most important things of this truce agreement. Russia will try to take as much as possible, obviously. Of course, if the Ukrainians are able to hold their positions in the city of Pokrovsk and the city of Constantinople and to defeat the Russians, I'm not sure what kind of peace agreement then the Russians will be forced to sign. This is the general battle of 2025 that will determine the main paragraphs of this truce agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians will try to stand here as much as possible. The only problem for Ukrainians is they can't abandon their positions in Sudzha. The Ukrainians, these soldiers that probably could play the significant role, the significant part in the general battle, would be blocked by the Russians in the Sudzha direction, and this is the very interesting things that the Russians managed to complete by the beginning of the general battle. The Ukrainians, if they lose Constantinople and Pokrovsk, they will be forced to sign everything the Russians will demand. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians, according to different pro-Russian resources, managed to improve their positions and to take under control several strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine. Summarizing everything, according to different pro-Russian resources, the Russians have already established complete control over everything to the east of this red line. There are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Stupachki, and basically this is the last settlement before the settlement of Constantinople. So it's going to be a very, very big offensive from the Russian side that will start during the next several weeks. Now let's discuss the situation in the Syrian direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything, just several FPV drone attacks on the Russian units on the territory of Bilogorovka, which confirms Russian presence there. As for the southern Kupiansk or the Liman direction, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and about to take under control the settlement of Yampolovka. We believe that during the next 5 days the village will be captured completely and the Russians will begin offensive towards this village of Tarskoye, the last village on the Russian side of the river of Zherebets. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special. We got just one video from the area of Topoli. This video was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians from the 3rd Tank Brigade was FPV droning the Russian units there. What's the most important is that this territory was considered as a contested area or the Great Zone. Different mappers colored this territory in Russian favor several weeks ago, and just now we got geolocation that can confirm this. Another important updates are coming from the territory of Sudzha. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Sverdlikovo. This information was confirmed mainly by pro-Russian resources, but also right before we start making the video, the official Telegram channel of the Group of Forces North published another article where they stated that the village of Sverdlikovo was completely secured and captured by the Russians. Most likely tomorrow the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information as well. And the next target and the next task of the Russians is to secure the settlement of Lebedevka. And after the fall of Lebedevka, this is the village to the northeast of Sverdlikovo, we're talking about this area. If this village falls, then the battle for Sudzha has begun, will begin. So the situation for the Ukrainians here is very difficult. On the northern flank, we have another video published by the 47th Mechanized Brigade. In this video, we can see huge convoys of the armored forces of Russian Federation heading towards the settlement of Viktorovka and Nikolsky. The Ukrainians did all their best to slow down the Russians. We see lots of infantry, lots of tanks, vehicles that were moving in the direction of the settlement. Very big, long video. One of the episodes was geolocated in this point. We don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to enter the village or not, or they were stopped by the Ukrainian FPV drones. We don't know this for sure, but obviously we know the direction. Maybe tomorrow the mappers or the sources will provide us additional details. Anyway, one thing which is important, the Russians during the battle in the southwestern flank of Sudzha direction, in the southeastern flank, also tried to cut the northern flank in the area of Malaya Loknya. And we got very important video from the settlement of Fansievka. This is the village that was taken by the Ukrainians during their counter-attack that took place a week ago, 10 days ago. In this video, we can see how a group of Russian soldiers were moving through the village of Fansievka, were filming the consequences of clashes, of battles, and based on this video, we have adjusted this map. The Russians, we have proofs, restored control over the settlement. We don't know the status of the village of Cherkasskaya Konopelka, but different pro-Russian resources reported that there are also very heavy clashes. So we see that the situation for the armored forces of Ukraine is critical, and they need this negotiation possible even more than anyone else in the world. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.